New from ESCO Institute. This is what people are saying about the ESCO EPA Section 608 online interactive course.
Great presentation and understanding of materials. The clarity of topics are consistent, which helps the learning process immensely.
The flashcards, along with the excellent graphics and clear instructions, are fantastic.
I took the 608 core test before I came here and got 45%. After taking the ESCO course, I passed with 85%.
Do you need to get 608 certified? You will find the ESCO EPA Section 608 interactive course on the HVACR Learning Network. The HVACR industry's leading source of online and digital content. Visit us at hvacr.elearn.network.
Well, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us once again on Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC show. We're going to spend a little bit more time diving into some Train the Trainer. We're hanging out with the Professor Eugene Silverstein. How are you, sir?
Great, Clifton.
And the Jason Abjud. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking, Clifton.
Absolutely. So we spent last week talking about Train the Trainer resources for low GWP refrigerants. This week we're going to talk about training resources for the ESCO 608. So there's a lot of things that have changed throughout history, and there's a lot of people that really aren't even aware of what those changes are. So we're here to talk about what resources you have and becoming a proctor if you're not already a proctor. So last week we talked about things that are changing in the industry and the reasons that we all need to stay up to date with what's happening in refrigerants. We really have two separate things going on, don't we, guys? We've got the EPA looking at refrigerants, we got technology transitions, well, and we got the A2Ls mixed in there, and how is it going to affect all of us? Well, a variety of ways. So we're going to talk about some of those changes today. So let's kind of start out by talking about what has been updated over the years in the 608 and things that are relevant in the newer presentations that don't always get covered out in the industry. And Renee and I is going to talk later about resources for training and some of the free resources that we offer and how to be very cautious with some of the free resources in the industry, even some of the paid resources that may not have been updated over time. So all three of us, we've seen a lot of changes, going from technicians into trainers and then you guys into authors. A lot of stuff has changed, hasn't it, Eugene?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny because whenever I get to speak to people, I always talk about when I entered this industry in 1980, I had 4 tanks of refrigerant on my truck. I had 12, 22, 500, 502, and I could fix anything.
Anything.
And now, if you look at any of the apps, like the refrigerant slide, any of these apps that give you pressure temperature relationships, you're looking at over 100 refrigerants at your disposal. So it's a rough time now. Imagine you have 105 drums of refrigerant on your truck. Yeah, definitely a rough one now.
And trying to keep up with all of the changes. So one thing that we've seen a lot of, we see a lot of our instructors, a lot of new instructors at our conference last year. Hopefully we'll see a lot of new instructors again this year in weeks. We are counting down the weeks. Well, what are those resources? Because all three of us kind of walked into the same thing. Eugene, you talk about this all the time. We walk into a program and we go, okay, where's my resources? And they dangle them in front of you and go, here they are. Here's your keys. All right. How do we do the program?
Like Howard always says, when a new teacher gets hired, they say, here are the keys, see you at the Christmas party. Good luck with them.
Good luck. So ESCO has maintained all of our training curriculum throughout the different changes. So let's talk about some of these changes to make sure that our program is teaching the most current expectations of what the EPA requires out of the 608. Now, let's start with one thing. Because we get a lot of questions. Oh, this whole A2L thing, is it going to fall under my 608? We're going to kind of talk about that at different times today. But let's clarify real quick, Eugene, what was the whole purpose of the 608?
So if you look back, as far back as 1976, Roland and Molina published a paper about the dangers of ozone depleting substances in the environment.
Right.
So that really led to the whole EPA Section 608 program. And when we talk about the Clean Air Act of 1990, that's really an amendment to the 1970 Clean Air Act. So this has been going on for over 50 plus years.
Exactly.
So when we were looking at Section 608, we were really looking at ozone depleting substances. And we've established that it's the chlorine in these compounds that deplete ozone. So when we look at Section 608, we're really talking about the the ozone depletion potential of CFCs and HCFC refrigerants.
Sure.
So if we think more generally about the Environmental Protection Agency, that's an agency in charge of protecting the environment.
All right.
So we have issues with refrigerants like CFCs and HCFCs that have high ozone depletion potentials, but also have high global warming potentials.
Yeah.
So now, so it became illegal to vent refrigerants in 1992, but if you look at 1995, that's when alternative refrigerants such as HFCs were put under 608 because they still pose a danger to the environment because of their high global warming potential, even though they don't deplete ozone. So we were really talking about CFCs, HCFCs, all right? Mm-hmm. Our R12s, our R22s, and then our R134As, our HFC refrigerants got bundled into that.
Okay.
So you mentioned, ozone depletion substances and then getting into low GWPs and A2Ls, which don't pose a danger to the environment. So we have to distinguish between an environmental issue and safety issue.
Safety, exactly.
So that's the big difference.
And another thing to talk about too, we get the questions all the time about, well, is this HFC, is this is it similar? Is it different? And it's always important to understand the difference between phase downs and phase outs. When we had our CFC refrigerants, we started that phase out where we were completely taking them out of the industry. When we talk about our HCFCs, we were taking them out of the industry. So we went from a baseline measurement all the way down to zero. We completely eliminated them from the market. Our HFCs are not going to be a complete elimination. They're going to be a phase down, and we're going to be left with a 15% allotment based on their global warming potential once we get down to that 2036 mark. So it is a different structure than what we've seen before. So we need to make sure that we're talking in our EPA training classes the differences between phase outs and phase downs, because we do have a lot going on in there. Now,
one thing I'd like to point out real quick, Clifton, too, that is for virgin refrigerant, not reclaimed refrigerant. Those. So some people will say, well, I can still find R22. Well, that's because somebody's recovering it, bringing it in, and is being reclaimed to be resold.
Exactly. So, and that's one of the pieces we talk about a lot. So let's run through a few slides just for our instructors that are with us today. Let's make sure that they're talking about some of these highlights that have changed and things that we need to be stressing within the industry. This particular one right here is going to be very, very important, Eugene. Actually, let's do a quick myth busting on this, because when we talk about the EPA requirements, a lot of people ask us, well, when do I get the notifications that something has changed in the industry? Well, there isn't a really good general place for that, except for here at ESCO. We love to send you emails and keep you up to date with that. So unfortunately, there are a lot of people that are uninformed of the changes along the way. So let's do a quick myth busting real quick.
I took my EPA 608 back in 1993. Ain't nothing's changed since then. If they would have, the EPA would have called me. Ain't nobody called me.
Thank you, Ty Branneman. So an important part that we have to stress in the classroom, that when the regulations change, It is the responsibility of the technician to comply with these changes and to be informed of what those are in a training class, right? So, a lot of training in the industry has missed a few of these steps along the way, unfortunately. And so that's really what we're here to do, is to talk about things that have changed and make sure that we are implementing those into our programs.
Yeah, and that's important, Clifton, because what some people may or may not be aware of is EPA Section 608 certification is a terminal certification. So it expires when you do.
That's right.
So, one of the questions on the exam is really saying, yes, this is a terminal certification. You pass it once and you don't have to recertify, but it is your responsibility as a technician to keep up to date with any changes that fall under Section 608. And you need to be, like I said, not only aware of them, but you need to abide by those changes. So that's really, really important.
Absolutely.
And there have been changes.
There have. And we're going to talk about a few of those along the way and make sure that people are implementing those most current into their programs, and to stay with us and stay informed in case there is anything that does change. Remember, there's a lot of things happening in the industry. We could have new updates to the 608 and have new updates based out of the AIM Act. We don't know. We know it's going to be an interesting year. If you all haven't paid attention, there's a lot going on in the industry right now, and we have a lot to stay informed of. So we have to be aware also that those regulated refrigerants currently include CFCs, HCFCs, HFCs, and HFO refrigerants, right? Here's another misperception in our industry that doesn't always get discussed. We have to have our own EPA certification when we are working with refrigerants or we are doing repairs on a refrigeration system. Not always covered in the training classes.
And that is a misconception, because if you have an electrician's license, you are allowed to have people working under your license. If
Absolutely.
you have a plumbing license, you are allowed to have people working under your license, as long as you're verifying the work that they're doing is code compliant and it is code. But yeah, you need your own EPA card. You can't work under somebody else's.
Jason, here's one that changed that not everyone is aware of that is absolutely a very important thing that gets overlooked, and unfortunately is one of the reasons we have such a shortage of reclaimed refrigerant in our industry. Let's talk about some changes that happened with leak rates.
This really does kind of shock me that when I bring this up, they're like, well, that's not that wasn't on my 608. I'm like, yeah, but it's there now. I mean, and you're supposed to be aware of this. Yes, the leak rates were added and changed, and it's something that everyone needs to be aware of.
Absolutely. I would consider this show a continuing education on your EPA 608. And so if any of these things look new to you, that means you do need some continued education in the requirements of things that have changed over time. So one of the things that we added was the new leak rate requirements, which means if we have validated a leak on a system, we are now required to do a repair on that system to get the leak below that threshold, and in some cases have a follow-up to that. So when we talk about comfort cooling, which is us, we're talking about a 10% of the charge per year. So over 10%, now we are required to do repairs. And a lot of technicians continue to live under that rule of gas and go, not understanding it's actually against the law for their certifications. We have a 20% charge when we're talking about commercial refrigeration, and we're talking about 30% of the charge for industrial process refrigeration. So a piece of that pie that is definitely not talked about as often as it should. So we also have record keeping that has been required. So records of leak inspections, initial leak verification, we have to keep on file for 3 years, and the owner operator of the equipment is responsible for keeping those records. So I know even on my side, that was a practice that was not very well tracked that absolutely should be. So if we're not covering that in classes, we need to make sure we're using the right resources for our training. So let's real quick go over just some of the things that we do talk about in our EPA program. We're talking about 342 slides ballpark for our EPA PowerPoint presentation. These are all just slides out of our presentation, by the way, for those that are joining us. And everyone that's joining us, let us know where you're at. I'm just outside of Brownsburg, Indiana. We want to know how big this village of HVAC is growing, and it's very important that we all stay together and learn about these different changes along the way.
But notice one thing, Clifton, if you can
Yeah,
go back one real
absolutely.
quick. So for those of us who took the exam back in the 90s, a big thing on the exam were the dates.
Yes.
The dates when it became illegal to ban refrigerant, when the Clean Air Act was passed, when there were requirements put in place for recovery equipment, when it became illegal to vent alternative refrigerants such as HFCs. Notice that the dates are not on that slide. So the EPA realized, and again, I mean, the EPA in 2011 started the process of revising this. In 2011, the EPA said that things have to change. The test is old, the regs are old, we need an update. So this took a long time because the new exam did not actually take effect until 2017, 2018, right in that area. So there was this transition period. And as opposed to saying, oh, you can no longer vent refrigerant as of this date, the vast majority of people who are starting their studies of HVAC right now weren't even born when it became illegal to vent refrigerants. So I just wanted to point out that, a lot of us had issues with the dates on the initial exam. But I mean, that was 13 years ago that the EPA finally said, okay, we need to do something with this exam. But it became illegal to vent refrigerant back in 1992.
Wow.
So things take time.
Yeah,
things
absolutely.
happen, but they happen slowly.
And they do. And we've seen quite a few changes. And you need to be aware of what areas those have changed. So when we're talking about our 608, if you are unfamiliar with what we're talking about, is we're talking about the Section 608. And remember, this is one of the sections of the Clean Air Act. Section 608 is literally just the Section 608 of the Clean Air Act. And so we're talking really about three separate areas of training. We're talking about type 1 for those maintaining or disposing of small appliances, less than 5 pounds of refrigerant, right? So that's a lot of our water coolers, window units, refrigerators, all of our compact sealed systems under 5 pounds. We typically look at what residential air conditioning and light commercial air conditioning is falling under type 2. So persons who maintain, service, and repair of systems containing more than 5 pounds of refrigerant, or if the installation, that's the key, if the installation of such equipment requires charging. All right. So if we are touching a system that is a split system and we're going to be working with the charge of that system or making connections, that falls under our type 2 of our 608. And then we have our type 3, which is our low pressure systems. And then once we've completed our core and all three, we would actually be awarded a universal certification, but it does require all 4 sections of that. Now, let's talk a little bit about the test format for those that are unfamiliar with what that test format is, because we're going to be seeing a lot more new educators coming into the program. Last year at our conference, we've seen a lot of first-year educators, and I'm sure we're going to be seeing more of that. So we want to make sure that you have the right resources and you understand that we are giving you options for doing this. And Renee and I will talk about that pretty extensively here in a little bit. So we're talking about a 100-question exam, 25 questions per section. The technician must achieve a minimum passing score of 70% in each section. Must have the core, and then we can add our additional sections on top. I always push for my technicians to focus on all 3 sections so that if you pass that universal on your first time, just like you said, Eugene, it's the kind of certification that if we strive to get as high as we can on that first time, it follows us the rest of our life. Doesn't mean that we don't have continuing education hours. And one thing that I also like to talk about is if any of these items seem unfamiliar to you, like they're items that you didn't learn back when you took your 608, this is a great opportunity to restudy, come back and actually get that universal, because you're going to learn all of these changes that have happened over time in the process. So highly encourage pushing for that universal.
It is a closed book exam.
It is absolutely a closed book exam. So we're going to have 25 questions on that Clean Air Act, Montreal Protocol, how to properly recover, recycle, reclaim refrigerants. We're going to go over dehydration. We're going to talk about each of those sections individually. Now, when we start talking about the test format, we have options. So I used to use the paper version. So when I came into the classroom, I was immediately introduced to ESCO, and that's where my resources came from. And then I started applying that into my classroom, and I started doing the actual closed book Scantron style exams. It's not the only one. Renee and I will go into those. What do you guys prefer in your classrooms?
That takes me back, Scantron. Holy cow. The computer test was like something out of Star Trek or something, because we'd always done it on Scantron. We're like, well, you can do it on the screen. It was kind of new, but we adapted, and it's, now it's standard.
Yeah, online testing is really cool because once you finish the exam, you hit submit,
and off you roll.
And you get your results. You don't have to worry about, taking the Scantrons and putting them in an envelope and mailing them off to get graded. And then the U.S. Postal Service eats the envelopes, and then they arrive at our office as a shredded pile of
what is this?
Something that has to be, it's definitely a neat process. I think the test candidates appreciate the online testing.
Yes.
Especially since that when they finish, they hit submit and they get their results right away.
Immediately. Yeah. Big difference.
You don't have to worry about mail.
Exactly. Another thing that's important to talk about in our classrooms. So I'm now introducing the 608 into my classroom. It's very important that the candidates know that they will be into a registry. There's no personal information to be included into the public registry, and there are ways to opt out of that. That's always something we have to mention right up front. And the things that we're going to dive into during our classes are particularly into like the Montreal Protocol, right? So this is what started the entire understanding of ozone depletion. And so when we look at the Clean Air Act, we had a couple things going on, just like we have a couple things going on in the AIM Act right now. So we had not only our act of Congress, but we had a international treaty. We had the Montreal Protocol, both looking for the removal of ozone depleting substances from our environment. So to stop the damage of that stratospheric ozone, we started phasing completely out our CFCs and HCFCs, and now we're in that phase down of our HFC.
And what's interesting, Clifton,
yes,
is, we talked about illegal to vent refrigerants in 1992, but I did mention Rowland and Molina that they had published this paper in 1976, and that actually led to the ban of using CFCs as propellants in spray cans and aerosols. Mm-hmm. So the phase out of CFCs actually started long before 1992 as a refrigerant. So in 1978, it became illegal to use these substances as propellants. So this is, again, we're looking at 45 years ago that this actually started.
Right. And there are a lot of people who don't recognize what the intent was, right? Even our HFCs, right? We have a lot of HFCs in propellant even today. So we continue this phase out based on that. So when we talk about like our refrigerants and what's required, say I'm a distributor of refrigerants, very important for distributors of refrigerants to understand what it is legally for the requirements of our 608 certification. So as a distributor who sells HCFC, HFC, or we don't have any CFCs left, but if you're doing HCFCs, R22 equipment, HFC, R410 equipment, etc., or other regulated refrigerants, must verify the purchase of that certified technician. So I myself, I was at a distributor, and so I had a lot of classes. I held monthly classes for 608. It was very important for me to make sure that all of my contractors were very well educated on the requirements and that they were updated on their 608 for purchasing of refrigerants. A lot of people go, well, what about automotive? What about buying refrigerants, in automotive? Well, it falls under a whole different section, section 609, and different limitations on quantities. Now, this is kind of the core, what we're here to talk about, right? Anyone performing an activity that violates the refrigerant circuit should be required to be 608 certified.
Violates? That's a little harsh.
It is a little harsh. I'm sure the technicians out there are enjoying that one. So if we are working on a system, we are required by law to be 608 certified.
Just a quick one, Clifton, because I speak to a lot of contractors and I speak to installers and they go, oh, well, I just installed the system. I just run the refrigerant piping. So I'm not certified and I don't need to be certified. Well, the truth is, if you are working on the piping arrangement that will carry refrigerant, you need to be certified.
Absolutely.
So actually, I mentioned that to a couple of contractors, and they were actually floored when I said, your installers who are running refrigerant pipe need to be certified because their work has the potential to vent refrigerant to the atmosphere if their piping is not done well.
Exactly. So when we think about that, we have a lot of technicians out there that are installation technicians that are not 608 certified. And as a contractor, I need to be aware that I am now holding that liability of having a uncertified technician doing those installations that have fines that can be accompanied to that as well. So when we talk about fines, as of 2017, a technician can be fined, which would fall into the contractor as well, $44,539 per day per violation for violating the Clean Air Act, including the knowingly releasing non-exempt refrigerant from appliances. All right. So it's very important to know from the distributor side, from the contractor side, the technician side, what is required of us and the expectations for staying up to date with all these transitions. So let's think about another one that has happened that may not be covered in a previous EPA training program that you've had before. Jason, I'm sure you could probably hop in on this one.
Okay, so as you mentioned, the 608 was updated. There were changes made to the to the rules and regs, to the exam, to the review material, and this is just some of it. When we're disposing of the appliances, the information that we have to record and maintain on, at our business has been added to that. So we have to keep records. We have to ensure that the refrigerant was covered. How much are we recovering in a calendar month? How much was sent in for reclamation? So we have to really cover our butts in terms of paperwork and keeping things on file.
This is one that doesn't get monitored heavily enough. And it absolutely should, because I think back about my days when I went into the industry. So I got my 608 in 98 or 99. And
easy there.
Yeah, I know. We're putting a little dating. But our practice at the time was not for recording refrigerant. Of course, we were scrapping all of our equipment that came into the facility, and it wasn't recorded and documented. It wasn't a common practice. So unfortunately, some of these old practices are still lingering around that are actually required by law. So what that is stating is that when disposing of appliances between 5 and 50 pounds of refrigerant, the EPA does not require the technicians to record the model, but it does require that you record the type of refrigerant and the quantity of that, and that you keep those documentations.
Yeah. And Clifton, it's really, really important, because I'll speak to contractors and they'll ask me about this and they'll say, well, how important is it for me to keep records? And I'll say, it's not important at all to keep records until it's important to keep records.
That's a very good point.
So whether or not there is, enforcement is one thing, but it's far better to have the records and not need them than all of a sudden be audited and not have them. So I always say the record keeping is not important until it's important.
Yeah, indeed. So something very important to talk about in our classes, if we already are not. Let's talk about, we know that the records of recovered refrigerant must be kept to ensure that the venting does not take place. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about reclamation over this next year because it's so important because of these things right here. Not only is it important, it is absolutely illegal for us to vent that refrigerant from the recovery machine or recovery cylinder after use, right? So we're trying to reclaim as much as possible so that we can get that reclamation process going. So those are things that we have updated over time. If you currently don't have that in your arsenal for training, we want to make sure that you reach out to us and that we get you supplied with updated PowerPoint presentations, that we're using the resources properly. And we're going to spend a little bit of time with Renee going over resources. Jason, Eugene, I appreciate you guys joining us today. And
just one quick note before we go. What we discussed this afternoon is not the entirety of the changes.
Right,
so
there's
this
more.
Is just the 30,000 foot view of some of the low hanging fruit. but there are a lot of significant changes that were made to the exam. So please don't rely on what we discussed today as the entirety of the changes that, EPA Section 608 has undergone over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
I think Clifton and Renee are going to tell you where to go to get that information.
Exactly. And that's kind of the point, was to grab some of the low-hanging fruit and go, all right, if you're not teaching this in your program, you have things that need to update, and definitely need to be looking for the right resources. You're right, Todd. One thing that's constant is change.
Hey, man.
All right, Eugene, Jason, thanks so much for joining us, and we're going to bring Renee in and go through some resources in detail. Thanks a lot, guys. Renee, how you doing?
Fantastic. How are you, Clifton?
I'm doing well, enjoying spending time out here with the rest of our community, keeping up to date with, how do we have the right resources? Where are the resources? What ways can I improve my program and make things flow better? Because we have a lot of technicians coming into programs that need to be trained properly on things like the 608. We have instructors coming into the programs that are going, okay, I don't recognize that slide that they just went over. Maybe I'm on an outdated version of the 608 program. And I need to know where to go. Or maybe I'm new to this completely, and some of the stuff that they just said is gibberish, and I want to learn more, but I don't even know where to begin. And so let's talk about a few of those things. I know when I came into the field, it was very important to become a proctor to be able to gain access to training materials for a program. So let's think about that just for a minute. Like, who is a proctor? I mean, when I came into the program, I was like, I didn't even know that I was a teacher until I became a teacher. And they go, well, are you a proctor? And I go, what is that?
What is that?
Right.
So the proctor is the person that gets approved to administer the exams, correct? So that's a strange word to some people, but that's what that person is. So, and we have up on screen here a list of some of the priority individuals coming from these different areas that we are usually taking in as proctors. So if you are an instructor at a community college, trade school, high school, correctional facility, if you have a registered apprenticeship program, if you're a wholesaler, manufacturer, a testing center, we definitely encourage you to apply if you're not already administering testing. If you are, we're going to go over some resources to make sure you know where to find all the tools and have that full arsenal of resources available to you for preparing your students for the 608 certification.
So there was one that was fairly new to me until this year that I had to start learning a little bit more about, and that was the registered apprenticeship programs. Because I've always thought of registered apprenticeship programs as programs that would be like at a UA or even at my school. But we are starting to see contractors that are developing their own training programs. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this training, this resource, is to help all of our technical trainers understand what resources they have available to you. So if you have a program and you have registered it with your state as a registered apprenticeship program or the Department of Education, you now have an institute where you can start doing training and testing. And that was kind of new to me because it's not really been a sector of the industry well served in the past. Are we starting to see more calls from that, Renee?
Absolutely. So we are seeing more contractors building their own apprenticeship programs. They're not getting enough technicians from the local trade schools, or maybe they're not in an area where there is a school with an HVAC program. So they are starting to build their own apprenticeship program. So it's a great thing to see. Apprenticeships can be wonderful. So, but we are definitely seeing that sector grow.
Especially, like you said, from those underserved areas, the areas that don't have community colleges with HVAC programs and don't have UA established apprenticeship programs in the area. We're now starting to see a variety of different educational opportunities. So that is one that has definitely popped up here recently. So if let's just say I'm an instructor at any of these facilities, and I'm wanting to understand what those resources are. Where do we begin?
Well, once you apply to become a proctor, we
Where do I
give
do
you
that?
a secret squirrel login
Okay.
to the ESCO website.
Oh,
So,
okay.
and
Now
we
I'm
have
there.
a number of resources available there. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah, let me hop out of here and we'll bring that in. Because that's one of the questions that I get often is, okay, I'm interested in what you're talking about. I know that I now need to update my resources in my classroom, and I
Mhm.
would like to do this. And so, easiest way, contact us to become or to apply for becoming a proctor. And then once we do that, now we're going to be opened up into a variety of different resources.
Right. So what we're looking at right now is the ESCO website. I am logged in on my Proctor account, and I'm in a section that's called Resource Center.
Okay.
So in the Resource Center, we actually provide proctors with copies of the preparatory manual. So we have both the English and Spanish versions. We have the PowerPoint available for you to download at no charge to the proctor so that you can put on your training programs. The PowerPoints are not locked, so you can actually add some additional resources, modify the material so it's more fitting to your program. So you can utilize that. And this little image right here, this is a newer addition to our Proctor resource. So we have a 608 interactive online course. It's a great course for individuals, students, even proctors that are looking for a different way to maybe present
Yeah.
materials to their
Delivery.
students.
Yeah.
So we have this 7-day free trial. If you just click on this image, you're going to log into the e-learning site and you will have 7 days to look through that material at no charge.
Like
So,
that.
yeah.
Now, is that a full view? I mean, that's not, is that a piece of the e-learning module or?
The entire universal course, all 3 sections,
Okay.
or all 3. I know better than that. All 4 sections,
Get it?
all 4 sections, core, type 1, type 2, type 3. And for a full 7 days, it's not a cut down version. It's literally a full thing. So you're going to experience the course just as your student would if they were taking it on our platform.
Now, one of the things that we were just previously talking to Eugene and Jason about was making sure that we are using the most current versions of the material.
Oh my goodness, yes.
So, where are we right now on edition wise for our
So
books and our
the
PowerPoints?
ESCO, and I'm going to take a step back from just talking about ESCO resources for a
Yes.
moment, because and this pertains to not only our instructors but anyone preparing for the 608 certification exam. There are tons and tons of 608 resources available out there because the exam has been out for many, many years.
Right.
But you need to pay very close attention to when that material's been published.
Right.
If it was published prior to 2018, 2019, it may be old. It may be based on the old
Previous
exam
versions.
bank.
Right.
Right. So you may be studying material that is not going to be related to the current version of the test. So,
Okay.
all that said,
Now that's really important to know because there are a lot of resources out there. I know a few of them I've actually went through myself to see what they offer and go, I don't recognize that question, and
mhm,
this doesn't feel quite right. It might feel right from a test that I took in the late 90s.
right.
So very important to know what pool of material that actually came from.
Yeah, I think Eugene mentioned earlier if you're coming across materials that's asking about dates, um, no more dates on the exams.
Okay.
The concentration on the current 608 certification exam is flammability levels of refrigerants, record keeping requirements, but we're not seeing a lot of dates that you have to memorize on the current version. So if you're seeing material that's asking about a lot of dates, it's probably out of date.
That's
So,
good to know.
so then getting back to ESCO material,
Yes.
our preparatory manual, the current version is the 9th edition, but it's V2.
Mm.
So what that means is we released the 9th edition when the new test bank first came out so that we had something out there to utilize for the new test. And as time went by, we made some minor modifications as we saw performance on the test. And now we are at version edition 9, V2. So
V2. Okay, so important.
V2.
Okay.
So you want to make sure that that's what you're utilizing.
Okay.
And I think we wanted to talk a little bit about the other resources that we have available too. We have our practice test. So just as we talked about last week with our A2L, we have practice tests that are on the website. So this is the public. You don't have to log in currently. You come to our site, scroll down to popular links, click on the free practice exams, and here they are.
There.
For 608, and we have practice questions both in English and Spanish because we do have versions of the test and both English and Spanish.
Absolutely. Okay,
And
and we've
then
also got the video for the flashcards that we put out a while back. So when you're studying for the actual words and the terminology for the test, we have an entire video that is a recap of a lot of the flashcards as well.
we absolutely do. So this is a best kept secret over here.
Mhm.
This gives you a nice little glimpse into, you'll see terms.
Special words and terms.
And these are directly correlating to the exam questions. So this is a fantastic resource for anybody that's prepping for the 608 certification exam.
So if I'm an instructor and I'm preparing for my classroom, I'm updating to the version 9 V2. So I've got my PowerPoint presentations. I've got an e-learning module as well, and I have an arsenal of free flashcards that I can direct my students to do for homework.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is kind of a little hidden gem here. I'm always pointing people to that. Hey, click on that little video there. So
And it is very popular. It is one of the highest performing videos that we have, and we've never ran any type of advertising on it. So it gets used a lot. It's a very, very, very handy resource.
yes, it absolutely is. So
All
do
right.
we want to dig into the online course?
I
Do we
think I
have?
would love to, because I am so proud of that e-course. That is such an amazing thing. We have a lot of people that take just the course itself. So yeah, let's give them just a little
Dun,
free
dun,
little
dun.
demo.
So let's take a look at this. So this is the type 1 certification portion of the online course. I
Okay.
just wanted to kind of show the menu here. I'm sorry, I'm flipping back and forth screens. I just have different points so that I can show a few different things.
Sure.
This is the main menu for navigating the program. So when we get into the type 1 section, we're talking about recovery equipment requirements, techniques, and safety. Those are the main issues. We are able to navigate through the program in all different topics and ways. And there are resources attached to the program. So you've got a PDF of the manual. There's a nice menu here that you can navigate back and forth. The slides are kind of animated, your text come in, there's audio, but those flashcards that we just saw in video are also incorporated here too. So you can get everything built into one.
Okay.
And the other awesome thing are these knowledge checks along the way. So instead of just utilizing practice questions, there's some nice different types of knowledge check questions. So you've got drag and drop, and I'm not even paying attention. So if I get it wrong, don't yell at me. I know the answers to these questions.
Oh, that's a
I'm,
sample of
I'm
how things
showing you
don't
what
work.
happens. That's
Right.
what it is. So, but, so yeah, so nice interactive questions, and there's different interactive exercises along the way. So it really makes learning a little more fun than just reading it all in the book, right?
Absolutely, it does. I enjoy the e-learning course quite a bit. So I encourage everyone to try that 7-day free trial, see what you think, and I'll guarantee you're going to introduce it into your educational plan going forward.
Absolutely.
All right, Renee. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with us today and going through resources. We're going to bring Howard in, and we're going to bring Ty in. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this evolution of the 608, talk about some of the history of it, and just get an idea where we are and where we're going. So Thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you.
See you later. Hello, sir.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
Good. I see myself, but not Ty.
Let's bring Ty in as well. Ty, what's going on?
Hello, everybody.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about this whole evolution. Like we've talked about how things have changed over time, Howard. Let's talk about where it kind of began, right? I always reference back to the Clean Air Act of 1970 is where much of this began, but it actually goes back even further than that, doesn't it?
It does. So actually during the Eisenhower administration was the first time that we recognized problems with the environment. We just didn't have a national agency to address it. I believe it was 1955 that the first federal legislation dealing with the environment was addressed. And the Clean Air Act itself, even though the EPA wasn't formed until 1970 under Richard Nixon,
right?
There is a Clean Air Act of 1963. So, people forget we were talking about acid rain. The picture you're showing reminds me of what Chicago looked like when I was growing up.
Isn't that crazy to think about?
Well, think of this a few years ago. Everyone remembers the Olympics in China.
Sure.
And they had to stop manufacturing for several days because the air looked worse than this, and everyone was wearing masks. So we spent a lot of time cleaning up the air to make it safer for us. Think about this. One of the things that I like to bring up to people, when I grew up, there was lead in gasoline. Okay. Yeah. How many people died from lead in gasoline? It's something that you can't see. It's like carbon monoxide. Can't see it, can't smell it, can't taste it.
Sure.
Well, lead, we didn't know it was there, but it was obviously impacting our health.
So the evolution that we talk about is, so we started looking at air as early as 1963. So we brought officially in the EPA into the 1970 revised version of the Clean Air Act. And so that's really where we brought in where we are today. And so now, like Eugene said, we spent 50 years trying to clean the air. We brought in the Montreal Protocol to be able to update that. And then we also got into the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, where we focused on our HFCs. So it's all been a transition, and it takes time. It takes evolution for things, and sometimes the industry changes faster than rules and regulations. Would you agree?
I do. So, here's two things. I hear from a lot of people say, well, overseas they're polluting, so therefore why should we do this? That picture you had before tells you why we should do it. That's exactly what we all went through. The one of exactly.
Yes.
Here's the thing. Over time, through collection of data, we sometimes learn that things we thought were good are bad, whether that be leaded gasoline. Back in the 1950s, doctors were promoting which cigarettes they liked and promoted most at the doctor's office.
Right.
Today, no doctor would tell you to smoke a cigarette. So time allows us to collect data, understand the science a little better. And that's why the EPA is one of the most important agencies that no one realizes all the things they're doing for them. Absolutely. No one talks about acid rain today.
No, one of the things that I've noticed Ty talking about quite a bit here socially, Ty, is like R290. Right? We talk about the changes that are happening with refrigerants and being aware that we are going to see new refrigerants in the industry that may not fall under these. Because we think about like R290. Ty, where do we get R290?
From the earth.
Right. It's one of our natural refrigerants that we have to focus on going forward that is probably not going to fall under things like the Clean Air Act. Now, is there going to be requirements for the safe handling of refrigerants going forward? Yeah, absolutely. When we get into things like the American Innovations and Manufacturing Act in 2020, we start looking at changes that are in the industry and new authority to the EPA. Now, Howard, when we're talking about the authority that the EPA had under the AIM Act, is it different than the authority that we would have seen in the Clean Air Act?
Yes, and that's what's fascinating. What people don't realize, we get calls all the time. Well, can't we just take everything that's dealing with A2Ls and put that in the Section 608 program?
I get that question often.
I don't know how the EPA could do it because they're two completely different acts that had to start off as something that went through the House, the Senate, signed by the president. They don't have the authority without going back to the House, the Senate, and the president and combining these things. So they're two completely different issues. But I just want to show one thing.
Yes.
Most industries have so much training, so much certification, so much continuing education. And the backlash that we're getting from people is, oh, I might have to learn a little bit more. Think about other industries and how much they have to go through. I'll just bring up something absurd, has nothing to do with our show. California requires you go to school for 18 months, landscape design school, before you put bushes in front of someone's house.
Wow.
Every state makes you go to school to be a barber, to cut someone's hair. But most states, if I want to work with your natural gas furnace, interact with your electrical panel, I just need on-the-job training from someone else right on the job training. So these are good things to help the industry, whether people like it or not, because it's about continuing education. Me personally, if I was a contractor, a wholesaler, a school, if I'm doing training, I sometimes, especially as a wholesaler, I would take some of this new training and put some things in it that it's a little tricky. I would put in things people should know, but don't. It's a great opportunity when someone walks in a supply house and you're talking about A2Ls. Well, let's go through some of these basics that you should know.
Absolutely. Yep, I agree 100%. Ty, when we start talking about moving into newer technologies and education in the classroom, how do you see the 608 training utilized in an e-learning course as being beneficial for an instructor?
Well, I think it saves a massive amount of time because we know everybody learns at a different rate. I take a little bit longer time learning than a lot of other people. So being able to have this where a student can learn on their own time at their own pace really helps save that time in the classroom. We know how valuable that time in the classroom really is. So we can sponsor that into what's specifically needed that day or use it to more hands-on, more application of that time. So it's very beneficial for the instructor and the student together.
You know, Howard, when we talk about that big point that Ty just mentioned about time, give us a little history about how our programs have changed over time and how much more requirements are on an instructor in today's training facility.
One of the gentlemen I see watching today, very good friend of mine, when he started teaching, the average program was 2,850 hours.
Right.
Today, most of our programs are about 750.
That's a huge difference.
So in 50 years, we have cut the time by a quarter, but asked you to teach that much more. So I think part of the problem is we have to find ways as instructors to be creative and make our homework come to life. So what Ty was talking about, I talked to some of the apprenticeship programs that are 10,000 hours, 2,000 hours in the class, 8 in the field. They go, while our hours haven't been cut, we haven't been given any more time. So they use these online resources such as the EPA Section 608 course. That homework now is doing a better job than most teachers can. It's self-paced. And I find out along the way, do I really understand this or not? So when I go to class, what the teacher's really doing is a review and answering questions, not starting from scratch.
Okay. I like that idea a lot because, Ty, when we think about like your own classroom, I mean, how much time realistically were you allowed to be able to spend on a 608 in a program?
Oh, there wasn't even enough time to go through the PowerPoints. So I told the students, you have to spend time on your own studying because there's just not enough time for me to cover everything. But when they would go and actually study and then come back with questions, then we could cover a lot more information a lot quicker because now we're actually applying that. Hey, this person had a question or they interpreted it one way where another student interpreted it another way. And then we could talk about those two viewpoints so that everybody understood what we needed to do. And the instructor has to also spend time outside the classroom and going over that as well, because like we've talked about, things change so much and the wording of stuff changes. So I found myself having to study the EPA just as much as my students did so that when we did have that class time, I was prepared for it.
Yeah, and that's really what it comes down to. We're not trying to scare you into, you have to add this into their program. We're trying to help you along the way to understand that our hours are typically less than they used to be. We have more topics to teach on. Now we have A2L refrigerants that we need to train on. How can we be more efficient in the classroom? And a way that we can do that is implementing our e-learning courses. That good point, Jason, that is completely available on mobile devices to now assign as homework. So we have the opportunity to reintroduce the curriculum in a slightly different way.
And also not just for classroom, but if we think about the contractors and the supply houses doing this training, they have that same exact time constraint. And you're pulling your lead person out of the field and use them for training, having them sit in front of a bunch of students talking about dates, isn't the best use of time. But if you have them going over and studying at home, then while you're on the job or you're in that short valuable time, you can cover a lot more information. So it's not just for classroom and teaching, it's also for on the job teaching and apprenticeship program teaching, like all of the above. It really helps bring things together.
And building on what Ty said, how many people they pull over for lunch in their service vehicle, pull out their iPad, and that becomes training time.
Exactly. And we were talking about, now we can even do the online 608 testing, the actual certification side of it. So we have ways to reduce that amount of class time so we can utilize our class time for that hands-on instructional education. We're all facing the challenge of having enough time to teach our students, right? I hear that every day. I don't have enough time to teach everyone. Well, then we have to find better resources for doing that. And so we're just encouraging you to introduce e-learning into your program, understand what the updates are. And when we start talking about staying up to date with technology and up to date with changes with the EPA, Howard, let's talk a little bit about the EPA presence at the National HVACR Education Conference and ways people can actually talk to members of the EPA and the DOE on things that are changing in our industry.
Sure. So we're fortunate. James Casey, who's actually in charge of the EPA Section 608 program, is a presenter at the National HVAC Education Conference. So you're going to get firsthand information on EPA updates directly from him. He's going to be talking about the AIM Act, SNAP rulings, but available to answer your questions. Similarly, a lot of us are asking questions about cold climate heat pumps, these rebates.
Yeah.
What kind of money is there? There's billions with a B in the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, of money out there. Understanding these things, it's amazing how a contractor goes from, I'm not interested in any of this. Wait, there's all this money available. Well, where do I get the training for that?
Right.
So
How do I get prepared for it?
Yeah, I encourage everyone, spend time. We have quite a few people from both the Department of Energy and some of their labs, like the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory at the conference. Talk to them. I'll share something funny. Teachers would never walk in a classroom without a plan, without an agenda.
Absolutely.
Don't come to the conference without one. Take a look at all the exhibitors and presenters. Come prepared with questions. Come excited. Don't come asking for free handouts. Come asking to, how do we learn? How do I better educate my students?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you can get there on Sunday and come hang out with us, Daikin is going to be celebrating their 100th anniversary. They're going to have a great big kickoff. So that'll be on Sunday from 5 to 7. And if you are not currently getting our educator updates and seeing what's happening in the industry, make sure to register for all of the email updates that are specific for the portion of the industry that you're at. So yeah,
the Daikin event, that's going to be exciting. When you think about 100 years, what was air conditioning like 100 years ago?
Yeah.
What's it like today? What's it going to be like in the future? That's my understanding. Is not only are they going to cover the past, present, and future, but there's some big surprises for those who haven't seen them. Japanese drummers, they've arranged for them to be there. This is going to be a fun event.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. All right, so we're rounding at the end of the hour. Do we have any questions from the audience? Yeah, Jennifer, I wish you could make it. It's going to be a lot of fun. So a lot of new resources out there. We expect new things to happen from the EPA, either through the AIM Act or through the Clean Air Act, potentially both. We don't know exactly what's going to be happening with that. I want you to stay tuned, hang in with us every week, and we'll keep you up to date here on Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC show. Howard, Ty, Renee, Eugene, Jason, we appreciate everybody joining us. We'll see you all again next week.